Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our legal forensics hats to look at something truly mind-boggling. We're going to see how a single piece of paper, penned way back in 1670, literally transferred massive amounts of land to a private corporation. We'll break down the legal mechanics of this transfer and explore how words written on parchment centuries ago basically created a reality that's still shaping land rights, politics, and the lived experiences of indigenous peoples today. Think about this number for a second. 1.5 million. We're talking about roughly 1.5 million square miles. To put that crazy scale into perspective, that's about 40% of modern-day Canada. It's roughly the size of India. And with just a casual stroke of a pen, King Charles II, a guy who had never even set foot on the continent, just gave away this unimaginably huge swath of North America to a trading company. In doing so, the British Crown completely ignored the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who had already lived there, managed the land, and governed it for millennia. It's a land grant on a scale that's honestly hard to wrap your head around, and it really sets the stage for everything we're about to uncover. Section 1, the 1.5 million square mile peeper.
So this astounding historical grant officially incorporated the Hudson's Bay Company. Now, the Crown tried to frame this as some noble quest for a passage to the South Sea, just a simple trade license for furs and minerals. But the reality? Far more sweeping and frankly destructive. The charter gave the company sole trade rights over all the seas, rivers, lakes, and straits in the region. King Charles II grandiosely named it Rupert's Land after his cousin, and basically declared this private commercial enterprise to be the true and absolute lords and proprietors of the entire watershed.
Section 2, the legal loophole. You might be wondering, how on earth did European powers legally rationalize claiming land that was already occupied by complex societies? Well, listen to this quote right from the charter. The Crown granted this immense territory with one glaring little condition. It only applied to lands which are not now actually possessed by any of our subjects or by the subjects of any other Christian prince or state. Do you see what that does? It explicitly erases indigenous sovereignty right out of the gate. From the British Crown's perspective, if the land wasn't already occupied by a European Christian power, it was considered terra nullius, nobody's land, and therefore legally free for the taking. Section 3, corporate rule over Rupert's Land. This 1670 charter wasn't just handing out a trading monopoly. It actually established a private commercial corporation as a fully fledged colonial government with absolute unchecked authority. The Hudson's Bay Company wasn't just out there trading blankets and beaver pelts, right? They were given the power to make and ordain laws, appoint their own colonial governors, judge civil and criminal cases, and even inflict punishments. And get this, perhaps the most shocking part. This private trading company was granted the legal right to wage war against any prince or people whatsoever that are not Christians. They literally had the legal cover and the military authority to impose European law across millions of miles of indigenous territories by force. Section 4, the weapon, the doctrine of discovery. The invisible legal weapon actually powering this entire charter was the doctrine of discovery. It's a legal fiction that emerged from European legal traditions and 15th century papal bulls. It boldly asserted that European Christian nations could just lay claim to lands in the Americas, Africa, and Asia the second they discovered them, provided, of course, they weren't already inhabited by other Christians. Basically, it required everyone to collectively pretend that indigenous peoples didn't truly own their lands, completely ignoring their ancient occupation, their complex societies, and their highly sophisticated governance systems. By unilaterally granting property rights and sovereignty without even a shred of indigenous consent, the British Crown weaponized this European construct. And the practical effect on the ground? Absolutely devastating. It effectively dispossessed indigenous nations, reducing their deeply rooted land rights to mere occupancy at the Crown's pleasure. And that's only if they were recognized at all. This specific legal mechanism is exactly what enabled the massive generational transfer of wealth and natural resources from indigenous peoples straight to a European trading company. Section 5, Canada's modern legal paradox. To really understand the modern legal paradox here, we have to look at how this land actually became Canada. The Rupert's Land in Northwestern Territory Order of 1870 is recognized as a fundamental constitutional document under the Constitution Act of 1982. This imperial order is what transferred these vast lands from the Hudson's Bay Company back over to Canada, which created a strict constitutional obligation to settle Aboriginal land claims and protect existing land titles. But here is the massive, glaring contradiction.
What the 1870 order absolutely doesn't address is the fact that the Crown had already stolen these lands from indigenous peoples through that doctrine of discovery mechanism we just talked about. So today, Section 35 of the Constitution affirms Aboriginal rights, but the underlying Crown title it rests upon, yeah, it's still rooted in a 15th century legal fiction. This forces indigenous peoples to endlessly prove their rights to land that was simply taken without their consent in the first place.
Section 6. The Global Verdict. Now, while this legal tension is still very much persisting domestically, the rest of the world has definitely been paying attention. Tracing this timeline is incredibly revealing. We start way back in the 15th century with the papal bulls creating the doctrine of discovery. Then, skip to 1670, we see it fully weaponized in the Royal Charter granting Rupert's Land. Centuries pass, and in 1982, Canada begins to constitutionally affirm Aboriginal rights. But the true paradigm shift, that happens in 2007, when the United Nations General Assembly adopts UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This timeline maps out a slow but truly dramatic shift away from colonial entitlement and toward a global legal consensus based on human rights. Today, that modern international consensus is firm. UNDRP, which is endorsed by Canada, fundamentally rejects the discriminatory tenets of the doctrine. It strongly affirms Indigenous rights to self-determination, to their cultural identity, and critically, to their traditional lands and resources. In modern international law, the doctrine of discovery is simply not recognized anymore. International bodies and human rights experts widely condemn it as a racist, illegitimate relic of colonialism, emphasizing over and over that it has absolutely no place in a just and equitable legal system. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on. How does a nation successfully reconcile its modern constitutional commitments to Indigenous rights when its underlying land titles are still built upon a legal fiction written on a piece of parchment in 1670? Understanding the history of the Royal Charter and the doctrine of discovery isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's absolutely vital if we ever hope to truly grasp the ongoing struggles for Indigenous rights, resources, and reconciliation today. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep asking those hard questions, keep digging into the source material, and I'll catch you next time.